This is part of the Drive Electric Virginia program, which is part of a larger federal program. So we have a great set of panelists for you today, representing the many different components of the electric vehicle ecosystem, from the manufacturers to the utilities, to the EV clubs and the equity component. So we have a great panel. Hopefully, we'll be getting lots of good questions in the Q&A box as we go along for our panelists. And so I will ask John to move the slide forward. Kind of go over the agenda here. Sorry, I'm still kind of getting over a bit of a sinus infection, so hopefully my voice will last the entire time we're chatting. Once again, yes, my name is Matthew Wade. I'm Deputy Director at Virginia Clean Cities. I'll be discussing some of the ongoing electrification efforts in Virginia this past year, kind of the progress we've made, the amount of new EVs that we've seen on the road, kind of a geographical dispersion, or showing kind of where these vehicles are being registered, the new stations that are being built. We're seeing great new station building all over the state. And then I'll pass it off to our first panel on the power and presence of the electric vehicle clubs in Virginia. Electric vehicle clubs are a very important component of education and outreach. They help non-EV drivers, get into a seat and test it out without having to go to a dealership. They are great community advocates for electric vehicles, and we have Charles Jarina, the lead organizer of Drive Electric RBA, and Ariana Jones, the vice president of Drive Electric Tidewater, here with us today. After that, we'll have a short Q&A period where you can ask questions of the panelists, and we can have a discussion over about what role the EV clubs see themselves kind of developing into as EVs become more and more mainstream. Then we'll move on to our second set of panelists, and we have a manufacturer's perspective with Jared Jensen. He's the manager for dealer community charging and the EV ecosystem with General Motors. We're very excited to have Jared on the call today to discuss their new community charging program, which we're very excited. We hope that lots of dealerships participate in this program to get more and more level 2 charging into their communities. Then we have, with the utilities and the EV landscape perspective, we have Aaron Puryear, manager of the Member Services and Innovation Planning with Old Dominion Electric Cooperative, discussing the utilities role and facilitating the adoption of electric vehicles and charging stations. And the co-ops, the co-ops are very important in Virginia. They represent a large portion of the state, and so understanding their role and how they can facilitate EVs will be very important to discuss. And then finally, we have a dialogue on underserved communities and electrification transportation with Dr. Shelley Francis, co-founder of EV Noir and EV Hybrid Noir. And we'll round things out with a final Q&A period after those 3 presentations. So I thank you all for your patience as I go through this agenda. And next slide. Just a quick background on the Virginia Clean Cities team. We're based in Harrisonburg, Virginia at James Madison University. We're led by our director, Alan Harned. Myself, Matthew Wade, Deputy Director. We have a solid team. Bruce Velk, our EV Program Manager, is based out of Charlottesville. Sarah Stalkup Jones, our Research and Heavy Duty Vehicle Programs Manager, is in Harrisonburg, and she's also our Chief Equity Officer. And John Majorana, our Program Coordinator, who is assisting me with all of the logistics of this presentation. So, thank you, John. And next slide. Some background on the Drive Electric Virginia program. We have it's part of a 24 state and growing. We've actually added a few more states to this program in 2022, seeking to address the challenges of transportation electrification across the country. We do this through 7 project areas. We have statewide EV programs, which is what the Drive Electric Virginia branding is from. We have our consumer education and chapter development. We have developed 2 new Drive Electric Virginia chapters this year, Drive Electric Shenandoah and Drive Electric Tidewater. We're bringing on board to the Drive Electric Virginia chapter family. Utility and regulator engagement. It's important that the utilities and the regulators be engaged and educated, and have the right resources to address consumer needs. They're usually the first people that EV or potential EV owners will talk to. They'll talk to their utility representative about, what do I need to do to prepare my house for an electric vehicle? So providing incentives to their customers, providing education. They're usually the front lines of, someone's electrification road trip, I guess you would call it. EV charging infrastructure planning. We have worked with many local governments this year, developing EV charging planning documents for them, giving them an assessment of just how many electric vehicle charging stations they may need to install to hit 10 or 20% of their vehicles in their communities. So that's been a very productive area for this project. Our state and local government official education program. We work with the local government, local fleet managers, state agencies, state Department of General Services, state parks, basically any agency or local government that has a vehicle. We've been trying to work with them, or have worked with them, to provide education, provide resources, in some cases help them acquire charging stations or EVs for their fleets. So getting more and more electrification in the public sector, that's one of our goals of this project. Dealer engagement. We have a preferred dealer program on our website, on the Drive Electric Virginia website now, with several dealerships who are offering electric vehicles, and those can be found at driveelectricvirginia.org. And then we have the fleet engagement and EV options. We're currently doing a survey of 50 fleets in Virginia to get feedback on their electrification efforts, their level of comfortability or knowledge of electrification and transportation electrification. And we're going to use that to better design future programs to meet these needs that we're discovering. So, and we're finishing up the second year, so next year is the final and third year of the project. So we will see where this goes, but we're hopeful we can continue to have the Drive Electric Virginia program into the coming years as we go. So next slide, John. Just some quick updates on where we are in terms of EV registrations. As you can see, we're over 30,000 electric vehicles registered in the state now, and that is a 100% increase from 2019. So if you had asked me if this was a stock and you told me it was going to double in 2 years, I would have invested in it. So clearly there is interest, significant interest in electric vehicles in Virginia. Well, there are 7 million electric vehicles in Virginia, so overall they're not a large percentage of the total Virginia fleet, but they make up a larger and larger percentage of the new vehicle sales each year. So now we're at 3 or 4% sales in Virginia of market share. Nationally, some statistics came out yesterday that we have hit 12% of all new car sales in the country are electric. And so that is a very significant achievement. They say it, analysts have said that at 5%, you've essentially reached the tipping point, and that it is now a mature or emerging emerging and mature segment of that industry. So electric vehicles are becoming more and more mainstream and more accepted and more in demand. And that's being seen by the sales numbers. Next slide, John. Hybrid, yeah, we can talk about hybrids. Hybrids, similarly, we're still seeing large numbers of hybrids being registered in Virginia, but it's not growing nearly as quickly as electric vehicles. So it's great to see that those are still a good option for folks. And we want people to drive the most efficient and cleanest vehicles that they can afford and that meet their daily duty cycle. So thank you, John. Next slide. Geographically, you can see how they've kind of concentrated electric vehicle registrations in Northern Virginia, Richmond, Hampton Roads, somewhat in Charlottesville, Albemarle County. But we're starting to see more and more darker green spreading out beyond the major metropolitan centers in Virginia. So the Fredericksburg corridor, going outside Northern Virginia towards Culpeper, Rockingham County, Augusta County, Roanoke area. All of these areas are starting to expand. You're going to see more and more electric vehicle adoption beyond kind of the larger metro areas. And that's being facilitated by our next slide, John, if you want to go to the next one. The charging station deployment is rapidly expanding as well, as we're seeing more and more level 2s being deployed, more and more DC fast chargers. We had about a 500 station or 500 plug increase last year, or so far this year. In 2022, we've had about 500 new plugs installed in Virginia for level 2s and almost 300 plugs for DC fast chargers. So not only are the vehicles coming down in cost and becoming more and more functional, but the charging equipment is becoming more and more prevalent and accessible. So we're really seeing a dovetail of the components that would make a successful, mature electric vehicle industry. So thank you, John. Next slide, please. And so to support this, just to give you an idea of where we are in the life cycle or the road trip that we're all on here, to support 10% electrification in Virginia, or 730,000 electric vehicles, we're going to need 91,000 charging stations at workplaces. We're going to need almost 58,000 public level 2 chargers and almost 6,500 DC fast chargers. So we are nowhere near where we need to be in Virginia, but we're making good progress, and we can only imagine with these additional federal resources that are coming forward and the additional support that the private sector is putting forward in terms of deployment, that we're going to make a significant dent in this need for electrification over the next decade. So I will say one more, ask John to do one more slide for me. Yes, quick update on the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. So this is part of the federal government's recent legislation to support the deployment of DC fast chargers. So VDOT and Virginia Clean Cities worked together along with a consultant to put together the Virginia NEVI plan, which essentially identifies the existing corridors that are electric vehicle ready. So that would be I-81, I-64, I-95, I-66. I believe I-85 is either corridor ready or corridor pending. But essentially in Virginia, our corridors are interstates. And so you can see the gaps are the orange circles. Those could be potential sites for future DC fast chargers. And then the green circles are the exception. So they didn't necessarily fit the requirements that that Department of Transportation and FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, laid out, but they were able to grant those locations an exception so they can qualify for federal funding for stations in those areas. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to nominate more roads in the future. We just need to build out some of these corridors first and then move to the next phase of nominating more additional corridors. So one more slide, John. And so moving into our list of speakers and panelists, we have first Charles Jarina, the lead organizer of Drive Electric RVA, a Richmond-based chapter of the Electric Vehicle Association. Through various outreach and advocacy efforts, the group promotes electric vehicles as fun, practical, and sustainable transportation choice. Jarina's day job is managing the web presence of the research department at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. He currently uses the tools of storytelling and digital communication to make economics relevant to people's lives. Jarina earned a bachelor's degree in technical writing from the New York Institute of Technology in 1991. And our second panelist for our EV Club discussion is Ariana Jones. Ariana is an EV industry guru. Ariana has worked in the industry over the last year as an IT professional at Tesla and is now working on charging infrastructure with another EV charging company. Ariana has been advocating for EVs locally and across the state, as well as other sustainability efforts for the last 6 years, and has been an EV owner for the last 4 years. So with that note, I'll turn it over to Charles to talk about his experience as an EV chapter president, EV Club chapter president. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Matt, for the introduction. Next slide. So I just want to start with a little bit of a story about Drive Electric RVA. With the help of a group of electric vehicle owners, I founded the group in 2014 to serve as an information resource for both owners and those who are curious about the technology. And since then, our mission has evolved to promote EVs, as Matt said, as a fun, practical transportation alternative. We became a chapter of the Electric Vehicle Association in 2018. The first picture there, you can see that's actually the first EV that I owned in 2014 was a Nissan Leaf. And then the other picture is actually the first event that we did that year for National Drive Electric Week, which turned out to be a lot more people showed up than I thought. Because if you think back to 2014, that was a time when there was basically just a few mass available EVs on the market, and so the fact that so many people showed up and a couple of dealers showed up definitely told me that that there was something here and that our chapter was going to serve a purpose. Next slide. Next slide, please. So our group, so we started out by focusing basically on outreach, and so you could go back a couple of slides here to the outreach one. Yeah, so we focused on initially on outreach and education, and I just want to give you a few quick examples. One event we did this past year, picture on the left is we actually went to, there was a local Little League just in the city of Richmond that was having its opening day, and the lady that's on the far right, a Model Y owner, actually invited us to bring some electric vehicles to display to sort of help add to the different activities that were going on that day. And it was a great opportunity to interact with people in the community, and we tried to find opportunities to really sort of look outside the bubble of just people who own EVs to people who maybe are curious about them, might have heard about them, and would benefit from seeing an EV in person and have a chance to talk to an owner and get a brand neutral information based on our own experiences. The picture on the right is we actually, with the help of the Virginia Auto Dealers Association, they have brought their branded electric vehicle to display at a baseball game for the Richmond Flying Squirrels, and so we ended up talking to quite a few people there as they were coming in and out of the ball game. Next slide. And so that's examples of outreach. We also do education as well. And two examples I wanted to point to. Earlier this year in the February, we did a film screening in cooperation with the RVA Environmental Film Festival about cargo bicycles. electric assist cargo bicycles, and we actually partnered with that too, with that event too, with a local group called Pedal Power RVA that sells cargo bikes, and so they brought some bikes to display outside the library where we had the screening, and there was a documentary actually about called Motherload about the role of cargo bikes during the pandemic and how it was families were using them to get around and as more than just recreation as a form of transportation. Um, and the picture on the right is from the most recent event that we did for education-wise was at the Richmond Home Show. We had a display that was focused on micro mobility. So we had a, a, a very well-appointed golf cart on display along with electric assist bicycle, a scooter, hoverboard, and then we also had our EV education, EV experience educational exhibit that has general information about going electric. And so we were able to we ended up talking to almost 200 people during that 3-day event, educating them about EV technology. Next slide. We add advocacy to our activities in recent years because we realize the importance of policy and electric vehicle adoption. We figure, what's the point of getting people interested in EVs if a local dealership doesn't sell them, for example? And that's where the advanced clean car standards come into play, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. This is something that other chapters of the Electric Vehicle Association have realized as well. And so they've also become more active in a policy standpoint. And these are pictures from an event we did a couple of years ago, this is before the pandemic, where we actually had some EVs on display near the state capitol. We invited folks to stop by, the lawmakers who were going between the Capitol and the Pocahontas building where their offices are, in between their meetings and session voting, where they had to go to vote. Talk to them. And we also offer rides in some electric vehicles as well, just give people an opportunity, the lawmakers and their staffs an opportunity just to talk to EV owners, get more familiar with the technology because they have a very big role in terms of either being helpful to EV adoption or to slow it down. So next slide. So I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about the advocacy side of things. Here's another example here where we actually provided some comments on the NEVI program, which Matt mentioned as well. And those comments ended up turning into an article that was in the Times Dispatch, where I was actually quoted in an article talking about electric vehicle charging and the state and where this NEVI funds are going to be going. Next slide. What's ahead in terms of the advocacy front, I mentioned the two things is obviously defending the clean car standard. That just, last year, the state lawmakers added Virginia to the list of states that follow California's regulation of emissions from automobiles. These standards are stricter than the federal emissions, and they're recently tightened by the California Air Resources Board. So 100% of cars sold in the state have to be zero emissions by 2035. Actually, Virginia won't start applying these standards until model year 2025. And yet Republican lawmakers have already acted to repeal them. They did that earlier this year. They have actually 6 bills that are pending in the next General Assembly to try to modify it or get rid of them altogether, arguing that EVs are just not ready for prime time, so dealers shouldn't be forced to sell them. There's a point to that. That charging infrastructure is still an issue, not just access to stations, and that's why it also, we're working. One of the things we're working on in terms of advocacy is strengthening the parking regulation to protect access to EV charging. We worked with the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club to have this legislation passed earlier this year, and we basically tried to strengthen that so that right now there's a $25 fine for people who park their gasoline car at a charging station or their EV isn't actively charging. The existence of this regulation enables site owners to also tow a violating vehicle, but in order to be a stronger deterrent, the fine should be higher for repeat offenders. There should be like some exceptions, like for example, charging stations at workplaces, hotels, airports should be excluded from this parking regulation because it would be punishing people for something that would make sense to do. And the fines that are collected by the state police should go into the EV rebate program, which is currently, there is a rebate program for electric vehicles, both new and used in the state of Virginia, but it is not funded. The last 2 sessions that the lawmakers have chosen not to fund it, so we need a dedicated source of funds for that. So those are the two things we're going to be focusing on in terms of policy. And I'll mention just briefly, I know I'm out of time, but I'll mention that the other thing we were thinking about looking at uh, is in addition to access to charging, which we did with this parking regulation bill, is also the idea of reliability. Gas pumps are inspected by the state to ensure that they are accurately dispensing fuel and not producing fumes. So it's not unreasonable to have some kind of reliability standards for charging infrastructure, at the charge port level, not just at the station or the location level. Ensuring that those public chargers are operating is especially important for EV owners who rely on them because they might live in multi-unit housing, they might be on a long road trip. And so we're looking at ways maybe there's a policy aspect of that we could help strengthen to help with that reliability part. So with that, I'll toss it over to Ariana.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ariana Jones, and I am the Vice President of Drive Electric Tidewater. And I don't have any slides for you today. Mine was actually going to be quite quick. I'm actually still at work. Technically, we are, just like was mentioned before, a subchapter of Drive Electric Virginia, and we handle the Hampton Roads area. And our outreach right now stems more for like National Drive Electric Week, and putting on other social events to try and bring public awareness to EVs, whether it be like the Tidewater Tesla and Taps that we were that was being put on, that we opened up to all EVs, or doing ice cream socials, or even doing the National Drive Electric Week event like we did this year. We even had Electrified Marina bring out a couple of their electric boats to the event. We also had some moats there, which are absolutely like the coolest little, I would almost say like beach community cruisers, like golf carts and steroids. They're quite cool. But it just bringing that awareness into the local community. This year, I'm going to actually try to put some events together, and bring more awareness towards like public charging and the infrastructure there, and trying to promote and educate, because I find that a lot of issues fall with dealerships that they sell the vehicle, but there's no education towards the ownership of the vehicle or charging and how all of that works, just for charging speeds, standards, stuff like that. So it leaves a lot of people asking a lot of questions that sometimes they can't get answers to, and that's one of the issues that I'd like to bridge, especially for the Hampton Roads area, which as of late we have seen a huge spike in EV purchases, and the presence is becoming quite noticeable. So we started using Cars and Coffee events to bring that awareness. Seems to be the quickest and easiest way to bring that awareness to other like-minded gearheads. And from there, we branch out and try to do, like I said, the social events in a public aspect, and go from there. I'll turn it back over to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Thank you, Charles. Does anyone have any questions? I don't see any in the Q&A. Yes, Rachel says, this is great. We need more EV momentum down here in Southern Virginia, especially with Caesars Casino opening in Danville. Well, Rachel, if you know anyone interested in starting a Southside electric vehicle chapter or club, please reach out and we can help get them started. We can get them resources. We can help them with insurance through the Electric Vehicle Auto Association. So yeah, we can definitely help kickstart a EV chapter down in Southside, if you have interested groups or parties that would like to speak about it. We had a question about, is I-64 qualify for a NEVI exception? I did a quick Google and see, and I-64 is not a alt fuel corridor at this time, but it could be submitted to Federal Highway Administration, next year when they open up their round of submissions. So we can definitely try to get I-64 in the pipeline to become an EV ready corridor. I believe it would qualify. It does have a lot of charging stations along I-264. So how much are cars costing these days? It ranges wildly. I mean, we see, you can get a used electric vehicle for $10,000 to $15,000, and then you obviously have your high-end Teslas, between 100 and 20,000. So yeah, the cars range in price dramatically, and they've seen a lot of interest in EVs, and that's caused the used car prices to actually go up, and the demand for electric vehicles has gotten so high that it's very hard to find them on the dealership lots, and it's created kind of a bottleneck with the price of gas getting as high as it is. So any other questions? Let's see. So a question for our panelists. Charles and Ariana, you both held a lot of events this year, and that's great. And National Drive Electric Week is always a big success in September. What is the key to getting great engagement from the public? Like, how do you get people to come out? Like, is there a secret sauce that you have to get people to attend and participate? And then now that EVs are becoming more mainstream, like what kind of questions are you getting? Are you getting a more mature audience for your questions? I guess any new questions that you're getting?
So I guess I'll start. We make a pretty good presence at the big Cars and Coffee events. For Cars and Coffee Virginia Beach, we usually meet up as a group and drive in so that we're all parked together and try to make a group presence there. For the other ones like Williamsburg and Chesapeake and Norfolk, it's almost as come as individual, but still, even one person comes in and tries to bring the information with them, that tends to work really well. When we have our big events, usually it's constant social media posting. So for instance, we have here in Hampton Roads, we have a Toys for Tots drive that we're hosting at the Tesla Norfolk store, and that's on December 10th, and we get social media advertising for Facebook, and we make sure that we pretty much relentlessly stay on top of social media, posting and involvement and engagement there, on top of car groups around the area and such.
Yeah, and I'll add to our just a question about what kinds of questions we get. And I have just I think that we had sort of a good example with the Richmond Home Show, which I mentioned, because it was a very diverse group of people, older people, younger people, families, that sort of thing. And there's definitely a lot more. I don't have a nicer way to say it, propaganda, if you will, anti-EV propaganda that's kind of floating around. Some of it coming from certain media outlets I won't name, that only provide like one side of the story. So the temptation with some of these more, because the temptation is just to say, oh, well, you're completely wrong. This is what the truth is, and things of that nature. But what I have actually found very useful is listening. Is just really listening and trying to get a good handle on what the person has heard, how that shaped their thoughts about electric vehicles, and then use that information to then shape what my response will be, rather than sort of just jump to oh, well, I've got 20 facts I can that could be directly oppositional to what you just said. That's completely emotional, because it doesn't matter, because a lot of this misinformation is driven by misunderstanding and emotion. And so the best way to combat that, I found, is just by letting people kind of meeting people where they are. And you'd be surprised at the end of the conversation, somebody say, I really appreciate you listening to me. And usually I don't have a conversation. The tone and the way in which people interact with each other these days has gotten so that people just don't. There's no room for debate. And so I really tried to kind of work on that. I went with other folks in our group to really establish relationships, because at the end of the day, you want to have a positive experience and interaction with someone, so that you may not change their mind about getting an electric vehicle, but at least if they have an opportunity to sort of have their assumptions aired and tested to some degree, that might make them maybe give it a second look. So that's how I'll answer that particular question.
Thank you, Charles. We do have a question for you about the proposed reliability standards. Is anyone worried that it will scare site hosts from installing charging stations? So if you're a site host and you've been suddenly you're held to account to keep your station up and running, is that going to cause a problem with site hosts? Is that going to scare them away, you think?
That's a good point, and I think that's why I'm in the mode right now where so I've seen it anecdotally, EV owners, both through our social media channels, just conversations I have with folks, saying they're really concerned about reliability. That they go, particularly when they're going on a road trip, and they find even when they check the PlugShare app and it says, oh yes, this is working, they go and it's not working, or it doesn't charge at the rate that they expected, and things of that nature. So this could be a real barrier to EV adoption, because if there are a lot of people that are coming into this past year, and in the next couple of years will be coming into EV ownership for the first time, and so they're not used to the experience that, say, folks like me and Ariana have been doing, having EVs for several years now. And so maybe we're a little more forgiving if maybe one station's not working, we go to the next one over, or maybe go to one that's nearby. If somebody has a negative experience, a couple of negative experiences, they're just going to say, well, I'm not going to recommend this to anybody. I'm going to have a very negative impression of them in general, and that's sort of not the right sense. So, and again, I go back to the point that we have standards for how gas pumps operate, right? Like we put, in terms of like, they can't leak fumes. They have to be able to dispense gasoline in a accurate manner. It can't be like broken in that sense. So I think that it's fair to regulate EV chargers the same way. And honestly, if you set the standards the right way, and I would say we would do this with with the EV charging networks as well, to come up with reasonable standards. Chances are, if they're reasonable standards, most EV owners are going to, operators are going to be able to meet them. And if they don't, then and if they're scared off, maybe honestly they shouldn't have built it in the first place. Because in a way, I'd much rather have a little bit less development than a whole bunch of charging stations be built in a flurry of activity, and then 2 years later, half of them are broken. I mean, you can say that was kind of a waste of money, so
Right.
we don't want to end up in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Charles. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Charles and Ariana. This is very informative. It's great to hear from you and all your wonderful efforts. And we look forward to having more fun events in 2023. So thank you both. Moving on to our next panelist, Jared Jensen of General Motors. Jared has been with General Motors for almost 12 years. He started with GM in the finance department and then moved over to GM Fleet, where he has worked in the rental, government, and commercial side of the business. He became the first EV consultant manager, advising GM Fleet customers on the move from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, and helped set up turnkey infrastructure solutions for both home and depot charging use cases. He currently manages the dealer community charging program for General Motors. It aims to place up to 40,000 level 2 charging stations in communities across the United States and Canada, utilizing the strength of the General Motors dealer network. So, and all, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jared.
Right. Thanks so much, Matt. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we got you.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate that introduction and really, really pleased to be here on the Virginia Electric Forum today and grateful to be able to share some of the exciting things we have going at General Motors. So wanted to step back really quick before I go into my program just to kind of funnel down a little bit. So GM, we are investing 35 billion in electric vehicles by 2025, and we're looking to have 30 EVs globally in the market by 2025, and 2/3 of those are going to be in North America. And so, as you guys well know, the Bolt EV and EUV have been out for quite a few, for a few years now. The Hummer EV is out. The Cadillac Lyriq just launched. We've got Bright Drop vans, and then also some really exciting vehicles coming forward in the Equinox EV, the Blazer EV, Silverado EV, and then we just launched and announced the Sierra EV, including the Denali trim there. So really excited about some of the vehicles that we have coming out, and the Equinox EV is going to be starting around 30,000 from the latest that we've heard, and so we're really excited to bring also affordable EVs to the market. But we don't want to depend on just bringing EVs out there. We know that we need to get the infrastructure in place as well. And so we are investing, as of right now, $750 million to really bring EV infrastructure forward. And some of the announcements that you may have read in the news, we've announced a partnership with Pilot Flying J to be able to put DC fast charging up to 350 kilowatts over up to 2,000 PFJ locations, and then 500 locations up to 2,000 DC fast chargers. We partnered with EVgo to place up to 3,250 DC fast chargers in the top 52 metropolitan areas. And so you'll see a lot of those. And again, I worked on the home and depot use cases on the fleet side. We've got some great partnerships there to be able to help both of those customers on the retail and the fleet side. We're working to electrify our GM workplaces as well, so up to 3,500 charging stations. And then also thinking about multifamily and how we can really integrate there. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the dealer community charging program. So realizing this is just a sliver of what we're doing overall at GM. Next slide. So again, as Matt mentioned, we're really looking to place up to 40,000 high-powered level 2 charging stations throughout the US and Canada, because we realize that we need to make sure that the infrastructure is out there, even though 80 to 90% of the charging happens at home anyways. We know that people need to see that charging infrastructure out there to give them confidence to be able to transition to an electric vehicle. And so really, we aim to accelerate that EV adoption across the US and Canada, and really looking to leverage our dealers, because they're located everywhere. I'm in rural Wisconsin right now. We just had our first chargers placed a little bit less than a month ago. And so, we're up here checking them out. And the thing I love is that this is really focusing on not only urban areas, but also rural areas as well. And I can tell you I'm in a pretty rural area right now. Next slide. So how does the program work? So really it's 3 parts. So GM, we are providing up to 10 chargers per dealer to be able to place out in their community. So these aren't chargers that are going to be placed on the dealer lot. They're really going to be working with a community site host to place these chargers out in the community to really create that EV awareness that they are an EV dealer, to really help bring both GM and non-GM customers potentially to the dealership as they create that brand awareness out there in the community. Again, like I mentioned, we're partnering with our dealers, and so the dealer will look to find partners in the community and really drive awareness. And one of the reasons we're coming on these these great forums here is we would love to connect up with those of you who already have great site hosts in mind, and you already have places where you want charging stations, to really see if we can work together to make this happen. And again, the community site host will help to arrange installation, also look for charger subsidies. We do have some infrastructure incentive lookup tools by zip code to help the dealers out as well. But we really want to create that atmosphere where the dealers and the community partners are working together, realizing that this is an optional program for dealers. And so we have about a little over 4,000 dealers in the US and about 450 in Canada, and we're nearing about 1,000 enrollments so far in the program, so we're really pleased with that. Next slide. So talking about some of the places, so dealers need to place these chargers within their sales territories. And so ideally, we would like to work with you as you have those different site hosts in mind to be able to let us know, and then we can also work with the dealers to get them enrolled. And so we can work to, to marry both together. And the locations, they need to meet the program guidelines. Like I mentioned, they don't go on the dealership lot. There's a minimum of 2 chargers per site host. So in other words, these are set up in the dual pedestal format, so 2 chargers to 1 pedestal. And so the dealers can choose, since they have 10 chargers or 5 dual pedestals, anywhere from 1 all the way up to 5 different site hosts in their community. And again, we want to make sure that these are open, they're well lit, they're accessible, they're places that people would feel comfortable even charging at night as well. And you can see some of the places down there, certainly not all inclusive. And Rachel's comment about Southern Virginia and trying to get Caesars Casino is opening soon in Danville. That could be a potentially a great location. We're looking for places where people naturally dwell for a couple hours at a time. So you can see some of those down there, where they get the charge, they're off doing another activity, they come back and they're able to get a significant charge as a result. Next slide. So here's a picture of what the charging station looks like. It's absolutely beautiful. I saw my first one in person actually today. We've seen pictures, but it looks super sharp. And so we have our GM Ultium brand at the top, and then the dealer will be able to have advertising there right in the middle. So it's about at the 5 to 6 foot level. And then you have the 2 pedestals. We've got QR codes so people can download the app needed, also instructions there. But these are going to be high-powered 19.2 kilowatt or 80 amp level 2 chargers, so the top of the line. With DC fast charging starting at 24 kilowatts, it makes it for a really an economical approach to help with the backbone for destination charging. And again, these are going to be connected. They're also going to have, again, networking and maintenance to make sure that they're up. I know that was a question. We don't want to place chargers out there just to have them be broken after a couple years. And then there's a cable management system with these, so it's not a manual wrapped situation, which we know that those cords will get left on the ground, they'll get damaged over time. This is more of a pulley system, which really helps to keep the chargers in pristine condition. Next slide. And so just a couple examples of the way that these can be installed. And so you can see the dual pedestal, it goes between a couple of parking spots. We recommend having the parking spots painted as electric vehicle parking only. In figure 1 there, in figure 2, you can have conjoining parking spaces and have the EVSE there on the side. We also highly recommend making them ADA compliant. We want to make sure that there's enough accessibility to make that happen. And some of our first chargers, they're actually taking up 3 parking spots just to give enough room, and they'll be painted as 2 just to allow wheelchair accessibility, etc. Next slide. So the question of who pays for what. So it's pretty simple here. So GM pays for the chargers plus the shipping. And then the dealer is going to pay for that pedestal that you saw, the cable management, the dealer branding that they get right there on the pedestal. They're going to pay for 5 years of networking and maintenance, also 3 years of warranty. And so with our charge station operator, they're going to, with that warranty, they guarantee up to 98% uptime. And so these chargers are going to be working. It's going to look positively on the site host, on the dealer, and also on GM. The warranty can also be up to 5 years at the dealer discretion. And then the site host will pay for the installation cost, permitting, and electricity. And we highly encourage to look for potential incentives. And we did have a great use case. This doesn't always happen, but in Big Stone Gap, Virginia, where there's 4 dealers in the area where they're going to get a significant portion of the cost covered. So we really appreciate that the municipalities there in Virginia are really looking to step up and make this program a success. Next slide. And that's it. So again, I would say, we really look forward to connecting with all of you, to working with you and working with the dealers to get these chargers out all over Virginia. So really appreciate the time and If any questions, we can take them, or we can move on to the next speaker. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jared. That was very informative, and that's awesome. I mean, like the fact that you guys are stepping up into this serious role and helping these communities get these charging stations out. That's fantastic. We do have some questions. It looks like for the charging stations themselves, is GM charging for the program? I'm guessing that means are they charging for the electricity? I would assume not. I'm assuming that's the site host responsibility.
Correct.
To
Correct.
take care of all the electricity costs. Yep.
Correct. And there is an opportunity to monetize with these. The site host can be able to collect some revenue. Some site hosts have decided to do it for free, and I mean that's an option, or you can monetize.
Excellent. And then is the 19 kW output per port, or is it split across both ports? So is it split down the middle if you have two cars charging at once?
Yeah, great question. So that would be yes. If you have a 100 amp line coming in for 80 amps, then that would be split if there's two vehicles charging simultaneously. But you can have, again, realize it's a lot of amperage, but you could have two separate 100 amps coming in, so both chargers would be able to charge at 80 amps simultaneously.
So there is a way to set it up to do 19.2 on both. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Excellent. And then we have a question, who does a potential host contact to participate in this program? So
yeah, so
your dealer, your local dealer, or yep.
Well, we welcome that reach out to the local dealer. You can also reach myself. I left my email, and then also I'm going to leave our general email here in the chat as well, dealercommunitycharging.questions@gm.com. And then we can certainly work to set up. But that's one thing, Matt, that we're working on. You know, how do we? There's personal identifiable information involved, so working with our legal team, and I mean we can share zip codes at this point of enrolled dealers, right? We realize that doesn't fully help, but we're trying to work through that to try to get dealers talking with site hosts directly, as opposed to our team making the match. But we're more than happy, especially here at the beginning, to work on that and to continue improving that avenue.
Fantastic. Well, I've just been told that we should save questions for the end. I was so excited to get into question and answer that I jumped the gun. So we'll get all your questions. We'll just save them to the end. So thank you, Jared. And with that, we'll move on to our next speaker, Aaron Puryear from Old Dominion Electric Cooperative. For Aaron has for over 30 years worked in the electric utility industry in a number of capacities, including rates, regulatory, retail electricity, and in energy marketing and trading. As the manager of member services and energy innovation planning at Old Dominion Electric Cooperative, her responsibilities include member communications, the development and coordination of energy efficiency and demand response programs, strategic electrification initiatives, including EV programs, and load research activities for ODEC's 11 member distribution cooperatives. Thank you for joining us today, Aaron. I'll leave it to you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. I've got a few slides here at the beginning that kind of walk through who ODEC and the electric cooperatives are, and some of you may or may not be aware, so I will go through some of those. Matt, if you want to go to, you can skip over to a couple of slides.
Okay.
And go to the next one.
Keep going.
This kind of shows the service territories of our electric cooperatives. ODEC, as he mentioned, is owned by 11 distribution cooperatives. We have 9 in Virginia, 1 in Maryland, and 1 in Delaware on the Eastern Shore. We have what we call a Swiss cheese territory. So it is interspersed with Dominion Energy as well as some municipals. The one exception to that is our Virginia Eastern Shore Cooperative, which is A&N in the orange. Go on to the next slide, please. As a cooperative, we are a not-for-profit wholesale generation transmission entity, and we supply the power to our 11 distribution cooperatives. We have a little over 600,000 members that equate to about 1.5 million people. ODAC has established a strategic goal to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, achieving a net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. Next slide. Our distribution cooperatives are, the ones in Virginia are regulated by the State Corporation Commission. Our Maryland and Delaware cooperative are regulated by their boards. ODAC serves 9 in Virginia. There are 4 additional co-ops in Virginia that are not in the ODAC family, as we refer to it. That would be Central Virginia Electric Cooperative, Craig Botetourt, Powell Valley, which is in the far western part of the state, and Northern Virginia Electric Cooperative. Electric cooperatives are member-owned, member-regulated. Go on to the next slide, please. And we operate from these 7 cooperative principles. I'm not going to read through them, but I'm assuming that these slides are going to be made available. So if we want to go through those, that would be great. Go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to keep us on time. So we kind of started at ODAC into the EV space back in 2018. We worked with a company called Advanced Energy out of North Carolina to do a vehicle and EV assessment study for our 3-state footprint. They identified 3 particular areas that we needed to focus on: member education, both at the cooperative staff level and for the end-use members. We needed to identify our deployment initiatives, primarily charging programs, and then the system optimization programs, which is primarily on the rate side. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've got a typo in this slide, forgive me. We started in 2020 with a 6-part EV training course for our staff that extended over a 6-month period. We have done a 4-part EV training course this year. And then we've got a couple of EV working groups. The largest one is facilitated by our statewide association. It's called the Virginia, Maryland, Delaware Association of Electric Cooperatives. We bring in vendors to talk about their charging programs or their chargers, the equipment itself, the telematics manufacturers, those firms that are developing the telematics tools now, educational tools, and EV branding. Next slide, please. So we have had a couple of really fun events for our staff in 2018, and then again just this past month. We've done a ride and drive at the Richmond Raceway out on the NASCAR track, where we had great support from the RVA Drive Electric Group, as well as other individual owners who brought their vehicles out to drive around the racetrack and allow our staff, our cooperative staff, to drive and ride. This past event, we actually had an electric school bus out there, as well as a shuttle bus. And as part of that, we made sure we included some education. So we had a speaker from EPRI come talk a little bit about the impact of EVs on the distribution grid. Next slide. On the end-use member side, all of our electric cooperatives have out on their websites an EV education tool. It's called Choose EV. And I've got a link to the one for ODAC's website down there at the bottom. It's actually an incredibly informative tool. We've gotten really good feedback. It walks through all the different models that are available on the EVs themselves, does some education on the different types of EVs, from hybrids all the way to the battery electric. Talks about the various forms of charging that are available. And then has kind of a calculator that you can choose a year and model of a gas-powered vehicle, compare that with a model and year of an electric vehicle, and it'll tell you what the savings will be. So it's a pretty slick tool. Next slide, please. For the fleets, for the cooperatives themselves, 6 of our cooperatives have a total of 10 vehicles. We see this number increasing. Actually, one of our cooperatives is going to be getting a Lightning and F-150 first of the year. And then as more and more advances are made in the heavy duty truck piece, we'll see more and more of that coming to happen. coming to place. We've got 6 of our cooperatives have EV chargers located at their office. There are no EV chargers owned by the cooperative outside of that space just yet. And then we have 1 co-op that I'll talk about in a slide coming up that has an active managed charging program. Next slide. So on the public charging area, we here at ODEC have partnered up with our national association, the NRECA, and UC Davis's Plug-in Hybrid and Electric Vehicle Research Center. And we're supposed to have, hopefully by the end of this month, an EV toolkit that is used to predict future EV penetration and commute patterns. And our objective of this tool is to identify the most optimal locations for EV chargers, both DC fast, workplace charging, and level 2 chargers. It predicts penetration levels out to 2035. So we're eagerly awaiting the delivery of this tool. Next slide. As I mentioned a little earlier, Delaware Electric Cooperative has had for about 3 years now a managed charging program at the residential level. The state of Delaware itself had some pretty decent incentives, and our cooperative added to that for the homeowner to purchase a charge point charger. They do use these to control during peak hours, and it's been very effective. Rappahannock Electric Cooperative has a pilot rate that I'll mention in an upcoming slide, but they do manage charging through this rate. Next slide. So we have 4 co-ops here in the state that have pilot or experimental rates approved by the State Corporation Commission. Rappahannock's pilot rate is based on the participants charging vehicles during the off-peak hours. For this first year, they were given a cap of 200 participants, which they have already maxed out with about 30 plus on the waiting list. And then next year, it will be increased to 400 participants. I think Joyce Bodo is on this webinar, so she might put something in the chat box if there's any additional information on that. Participants, they receive a monthly bill credit of $7, and they have to agree through, Joyce, I'm going to call it an honor system, but it's a snapshot that they take of their charging plan in the vehicle itself, that they will not charge between, that they will only charge between 10 a.m. and 2, no, that's not right, 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. or 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Apologies for that. Next slide. A&N and Bark Electric have a time of use rate. This is a very, very small pilot for each of them. They're limited to no more than 20 participants. They have not actually launched, neither one of them have launched this program just yet, but it is based on one of them has an off-peak rate and the other has a super off-peak rate. Northern Neck also has kind of a pilot experimental rate approved by the commission. It will be done through sub-metering, so it's a little bit more extensive, and they will they're charged more if they're charging. They're supposed to charge between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. and there will be surcharges applied if they charge outside of those hours. Sorry about that. Next slide. So what's next? In 2023, we are in the throes of developing our EV strategic plan, which we'll be using as a roadmap to cover the next 3 to 5 years. We're hoping to have that finalized by the middle of Q1 next year. We are going to be piloting a pole-mounted charger program next year with 5 of our cooperatives. Dominion has done a pilot with one of these, and we're eager to get that one. I don't know whether you all have seen the ESVE pole-mounted charger, but it's up out of reach. You use a QR code on your phone and the cable drops down, and it's a pretty slick tool. We also have plans to pilot a try before you buy electric forklift program. We've got a number of distribution warehouses on our system and other entities that use forklifts. So we're going to be testing that this coming year. We also are hoping to pilot a managed charging program using the telematics so that you're kind of agnostic to the brand of the charger itself. We're going to hold an EV Education Summit in spring of 23. And finally, we are evaluating all of the various funding opportunities for charging, and hopeful that we'll be able to be successful in that arena. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I'll make sure we hold questions until the end. But that was very great. It's great to see the co-ops getting engaged on the electric vehicle transition and supporting electric vehicles and EV charging in their territories. So thank you, Aaron, and thank you for all the co-ops do in their communities. You do more than just EVs. You keep people's lights on and their refrigerators running and all that good stuff. So you make life easy for us. Our final presenter is Dr. Shelley Francis. Dr. Francis is a former medical school faculty member, a public health executive, a tech entrepreneur, and a transportation disruptor. Her vision led to the co-founding of the nation's largest network of diverse EV drivers and enthusiasts, EV Hybrid Noir, a 501c3 nonprofit with thousands of members and chapters across the United States, Canada, Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. EV Hybrid Noir is the first global multicultural organization focused on increasing EV adoption and awareness in underrepresented communities, particularly those most impacted by transportation emissions. And transportation emissions are the single largest source of pollution in Virginia. So we're happy to have Dr. Francis with us this afternoon. Welcome, and please take the stage.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, and I'm looking forward to speaking with everybody. Alrighty, so I'm sharing screen here. Okay, let's see.
Dr. Francis, I think I just passed those privileges to you now.
Okay.
Try it again. Try it again.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So it's not letting me do it. Let me log off and come back in because I changed the settings on my Mac. So it should work, but just let me try that and come back in.
We'll have a brief pause. This will be a good time to think of any questions you might have for our speakers. Try to see if anything has not been addressed already that we could talk about. Solar powered stations. Yes, they are feasible. Virginia has pretty good solar capacity, being a southeastern state. I will say that solar powered EV charging stations are somewhat expensive, and we actually have one deployed at our office with 2 level 2 charging stations attached to it. And I actually used it today. Got about 12 kilowatts of charge out of it before the battery finally ran out of juice, but they are feasible. There we go. Now she's back.
Yes, we're in business now. Thank you all for your patience. And thank you, Matt, for being an awesome host, filling this space.
You're welcome.
Okay. Now you're not seeing this box on the right, are you?
No, we just see the presentation.
Okay, perfect. So again, thank you everyone for having me present today. Oh, can you also see me? Sorry.
No, I think John might have to move you to the stage.
Oh, okay. So if you need to see me, if you want to do that while I'm talking, that's fine. But I want to be cognizant of the time. So I'll go ahead and get started. So again, thank you for having me speak today. What I wanted to focus on is I wanted to talk about some of the research and data analysis that we've been working on for the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Project, which we are proud to be part of, in addition to partners such as Virginia Clean City, who are the lead, and DMME, who are sharing the leadership roles on the project, along with quite a number of other partners that we'll see shortly. So as Matt so eloquently and kindly introduced me, our firm, EV Noir, is a technology mobility consulting group, and we work on electric connected, shared, and autonomous mobility. And so what our vision is that there will be a world where all communities have access to multimodal electric vehicles, regardless of race, income, ethnicity, where you live in the state or the country. And the idea is that in order to accelerate this transition, we need to make sure that all communities are part of this conversation, and that communities that have been disproportionately impacted by transportation emissions are taking, a full seat at the table in terms of informing policy, practice, and programs. So the brief overview of our project, we are one of the partners, as I shared, and we are providing a technical lead in terms of education and outreach in collaboration with our partners. Our target areas was the Mid-Atlantic region, which was Virginia, DC, Maryland, and West Virginia for the sake of this purpose. And together, the purpose of the project was really to electrify this corridor. So we were looking at electrification across this region in terms of electrifying rail, air, obviously infrastructure, and looking at how we could engage more communities, particularly diverse communities that were adjacent to transportation corridors, how we could work collaboratively with them to identify gaps in the transportation and mobility sector. Also, while looking at where we could lean into opportunities along workforce and economic development. So here, just want to recognize some of the partners here. There's also additional partners that have joined since we launched the project in 2021. So another organization that has played a role in our work that we do in the region is EV Hybrid Noir, which is our membership organization. It's a national 501c3. It's the nation's largest network of diverse EV drivers and enthusiasts. And so this membership is based primarily skews Black and Brown community, Black and Brown EV owners and enthusiasts, but we have members obviously in the Virginia, Richmond, Northern Virginia, Tidewater area, and then we have members outside of the United States as well. And EV Hybrid Noir has worked with partners on this call for National Drive Electric Week, Drive Electric Earth Day. We're one of the 4 national organizing partners, along with Plug in America, Sierra Club, and the Electric Vehicle Association, who facilitate both Drive Electric Earth Day and National Drive Electric Week. All right, so moving on to our next slide. So let's talk a little bit about just broadly how we approach doing engagement, particularly from the analytical standpoint. So we utilize a methodology where we use a human-centric approach, which simply means that we're engaging with the stakeholders and the decision makers who are closest to the problem. And what we do is we utilize a mixed method approach in terms of thinking about mobility, equity, justice, access, to be able to identify like what are some of those social and environmental factors that are impacting mobility needs, transportation needs. So this is just a snapshot of some of our members from around the country. And then why this is obviously relevant to our space is that there's no turning back. We are full speed ahead in terms of the electrification and our e-mobility future. All of the OEMs are leaning into this conversation at varying speeds. Even rideshare electrification is front and center as well. This is really important when we start thinking about, from a public health standpoint, what this transition away from fossil fuel mobility and transportation can mean to communities, both from a larger viewpoint, but also looking at specific communities that we know, because of historical inequities and transportation policies, were and continue to be detrimentally impacted by transportation emissions. So that is one of the whys why we think about accelerating transportation electrification in a way that's based on science and research, and input from those who are most impacted is critically important. Again, here just highlights of the public health impacts. Um, African American kids, Hispanic kids are 5 times and 8 times more likely, depending on the study that you're looking at. They're more likely to be impacted by transportation emissions and respiratory illness, as well as mortality. And then also, when you look at different health indicators like preterm births, cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke, etc., there's um, so many detrimental impacts due to transportation emissions. There's just no safe level of exposure to transportation emissions, and that's not my words, that's the EPA's stance. So clearly, this is something that is of public health significance. And so when we're working in this space and collaborating with different stakeholders, one of the things that we know is critically important is that we have to work in collaboration with partners, with stakeholders, with community members, because those who are closest to the problem usually have a good idea on what those solutions are. So we have to engage with communities and stakeholders intentionally, but in a way that's frequent and meaningful. So now on to what you all are really waiting for. So the Mid-Atlantic research. So here's what we did. So we had this I'm going to say state, even though the District of Columbus, the District of Columbus is not a state, but we're going to call it a state for this purpose. So we had these 4 states, or 4 territories, and we wanted to look at knowledge, attitudes, belief, experience with mobility, electric vehicles, transportation gaps, access to charging, EV intention. So we wanted to just get a better understanding of just where the residents, key stakeholders are in this conversation. So we facilitated a survey. It was a web-based survey. We had about 800 responses. And so we were able to look at differences in terms of looking at both urban and rural demographics and respondents. So we're really excited to be able to take a deeper dive on the experiences, particularly from the rural perspective. But these are just some of the things that we examined, looking at obviously demographics, current transportation landscape. I mentioned EV knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, as well as information. Okay. And so here are some of the key findings. I will go through this really quickly, so you can see. I won't read it to you because you can actually see what the data says. But we can see we found some very interesting trends here in Maryland. About a quarter of people lived in the suburbs. There is some mass transit availability. Maryland had a very high population of respondents who identify as being Black. And we move on to Washington, D.C. Obviously, there's no rural area in Washington, D.C. Very high access to mass transit. Income was one of the largest shares of high income residents. And then let me see here. We're going to move on to West Virginia. So West Virginia, very rural population here, which is not surprising. Limited access to mass transit. And then they had over half of the participants identified being in a lower income group. And then here, these are just some key initial findings. So looking at charging access, you can see here there's quite a range in access to charging. So this means, obviously the bigger the orange bar is, the less likely they were to have access to charging infrastructure. And then also looking at EV drivers, or just, do you know anybody who's driving an EV? Interesting trends here in terms of looking from DC to West Virginia and to the other states. So interesting trends there. So we're at this was just a very high level, I guess, teaser per se, in terms of just kind of showing you like some of the things that we're able to find with this particular analytical approach. We're going to continue to do some, higher level modeling and looking at differences, particularly like rural versus urban, and looking at differences among and between the states. So really exciting to really share this initial kind of snapshot with you, but then also I'm sure we'll hopefully get a chance in the next calendar year to come back and provide more findings from our deeper analysis of the data that we've been able to gather. So thank you all for your help. And thank you for your attention. And I want to recognize the team members who helped support this project, Danielle and Mint, Dr. Mint. And I think Dr. Mint's on the phone or on the call today, as is Dante and Kevin. So thanks for joining and supporting us, and happy to, talk through some questions that you might have. Great day.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Francis. That was very enlightening. It's interesting to see kind of how the rural urban divide is going to be a serious challenge, I think, for electrification. And the reliance on mass transit is still very important in some areas, and then no mass transit in other areas.
Yes. So there's a lot.
I've lived in both types of areas, so I can tell you which one I prefer. I like having those nice metro trains to cruise around on. So.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, we really appreciate your team and your efforts on the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Project and all the insights and research you guys are bringing to the table. So thank you so much for your efforts. Some questions. Let's see, we have some questions in the chat for Aaron and Old Dominion Electric Cooperative. We have a question: is AEP involved in these electric vehicle power supply conversations? I guess AEP being APCO, or are you working and coordinating with the larger, I guess, utility, the publicly owned investor utilities?
We have not had conversations with them about these programs, but it is on my list to do. I've spoken with Kate Staples a number of times, but not with representative from APCO.
Yeah, I know Jason Smith and down in Southwest Virginia, and I do need to get in touch with him and talk to him more about any sort of new programs that are coming up for that area of the state. So that's something we can add to our list of tasks to come out of this meeting, our to-do list. Let's see, another question for Aaron. Are there any grid concerns that utilities need to worry about with the oncoming wave of electric vehicles? It's kind of a capacity question. I mean, is the grid, as it stands now, we know there's not a lot of electric vehicles out there, but what does the future hold?
Well, that is definitely a concern. At the cooperatives, from the distribution system perspective, they have to make sure that they've got the correct transformer sizing in place. I mean, particularly if you've got like a cul-de-sac and every single home decides they need an EV with a level 2 charger, there will have to be some upgrades done to the system. That would not be as big as the upgrades that would need to happen for a depot where you've got these heavy duty fleet vehicles coming in to charge. So it's something that we are trying to keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening so we can be prepared. I've heard of instances where particularly companies that have fleets make plans to purchase all of these electric vehicles, and they wait until the very last minute to inform the utility or the cooperative that they want to do this. This hasn't happened to us, but in other states. And, they are realizing that it's going to take a year to get all the infrastructure in place, and they're not going to be able to do what they want to do. So it's a matter of, as the fuel source for these electric vehicles, we need to be engaged in the conversations, and that's part of the education process, is to make sure that those who are going to purchase EVs and put in charging systems, that they make sure they talk to the fuel source.
Very good advice. Always make sure you talk to your utility when you're undertaking a large-scale electrification project, or even a medium-scale electrification project. Dr. Francis, we had some questions here.
Okay.
So you kind of have a global perspective. You have members from all over the world. What are you getting? What kind of feedback are you getting from some of your global partners on how to do an equitable EV adoption? And are you drawing any lessons from Europe or Africa, or how that the United States could benefit from? Like what equity lessons for EV adoption are there that you don't see being implemented in the United States you may have seen elsewhere?
That's a really good question. So, there aren't a lot of examples yet, like particularly from Africa, because they're like literally in the infancy of like EV adoption, and that there are some like pockets of EV work happening across the continent. Things are happening, there's more of a presence in South Africa, Kenya, Nairobi, Ghana. There are actually some manufacturers who are producing EVs. So Kantaka is one of the manufacturers in Ghana who's producing like a small SUV type vehicle. In terms of, I'm glad they asked about the best practice. So we're also one of, on the EV hybrid Noir side, on the nonprofit side, we're also one of the founding members and partners on the Global EV Alliance, which is made up of about 40 plus countries, mostly countries like Europe, Canada, the US, Central America, but those countries, we are looking at ways to like share best practice, as well as share lessons learned, address some, talk about some of the issues that they're facing, to see what things we can adopt and scale in the United States. So we are exploring what that looks like in terms of equity. I think equity in other places like Europe looks a little bit different because of just like their historical inequities are different than what we've experienced here in the United States. So for instance, the United States, when you look at the historical inequities, it's usually around like segregation, housing, transportation policies, infrastructure, and so some of the issues that they face in Europe are very different from what we're managing here in the United States. But I think that there are opportunities to adopt things. So, for instance, spent some time in Oslo in June, and like everything is electrified there. So from the water, road, air. So there's obviously opportunities to look at electrifying our ports and our shipping, our electrifying more of our airport infrastructure, and looking at more ways to, uh, electrify medium heavy duty transportation, which is something that we're like leaning into here in the United States. But there's definitely opportunities to electrify some spaces outside of the traditional spaces.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's going to be an all segments, all hands on deck task that we have over the next, the rest of my life anyway. Transitioning, and this is going to be one of the largest single economic disruptions in a good way. So we're hopeful that we can bring all communities along, and that they can all benefit from this disruption in the transportation sector. So we don't want to leave anyone behind, and we want to make sure that plenty of new great paying jobs, plenty of new education opportunities, plenty of health benefits to breathing cleaner air that everyone can benefit from. So I want to thank everyone. We're at 4:30, so thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
We have recorded this presentation and the speakers, and if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to Bruce or John with the VCC team, and we will have this presentation posted on the driveelectricvirginia.org website. Once again, thank you for staying and your contributions and your great questions, and we'll see y'all next year. Drive Electric Forum Round 3. Have a great evening, and have a happy Thanksgiving.